Suddenly, a biker slapped a 73-year-old veteran in front of everyone, and the whole crowd went dead silent. The slap echoed across the dusty parking lot like a gunshot. People froze, mouths open, eyes wide, unable to believe what they'd just seen. The old man stumbled back, nearly falling over his cane, his eyes blazing not with fear, but pure fury. What happened next shook the whole town, because within seconds, tires screeched, dust erupted, and a matte black SUV skidded into the scene. Doors burst open. And just like that, the infamous Black Cobra Commando, full tactical gear, no insignias. Only fear stepped into the chaos. Everyone there, including the biker, turned pale. The biker tried to run, but it was too late. This wasn't just about a slap. This was about land, legacy, pride, and revenge, and it all started a week ago when Thomas Raines, posted a listing to sell the private lake on my ranch. I thought it was a harmless post after all. I owned the lake fair and square. I inherited the land from my father, who built the entire ranch by hand over 4 decades. But within hours of the listing going live, my phone lit up with angry messages. Threats from strangers and a police cruiser rolling up my gravel driveway. The officer was polite but firm. "Sir," he said, "we received a complaint from the local HOA. They claim your lake is part of their shared community assets. We'll need to investigate." That's when I saw her. Karen Wexler, president of the Hidden Pines Homeowners Association, standing with arms crossed at the end of my driveway, smirking like she owned the world. She didn't wave, didn't blink, just stood there watching the officer talk to me like a proud executioner watching the guillotine drop. But here's the thing, I don't live in Hidden Pines. My ranch predates the community by 50 years. My lake isn't on any HOA map. But Karen had made it her personal mission to claim it. "It's a natural resource," she later wrote on the HOA Facebook group. "And he has no right to privatize what should be shared?" The comments under her post were filled with fire emojis, pitchfork emojis, and worse, people ready to protest, boycott, and even demand access to my land. At first, I thought this would blow over. It didn't. 2 days later, my gate cameras caught 5 teenagers jumping my fence and setting up camp on my dock. They left beer cans, broken glass, and cigarette burns on the wood my father had varnished. Himself, that same night, Karen held a community meeting to discuss how they could get legal ownership of the lake. I wasn't invited, but I showed up anyway. And that's when she said it to my face, "If you try to sell that lake, I will bury you in lawsuits." I smiled, not because I was amused, because I had already checked county records. And what I found would flip the script completely. Karen's lot, the very piece of land her $1 million house sat on, was on a weird split plot title. One part owned by her, the other owned by the old property trust my family had controlled for decades. She never bought it fully. She leased the edge of the driveway. That meant I had a legal right to buy it out from under her. And that's exactly what I did. I waited for her to go on vacation, then called my lawyer. Within 72 hours, I legally acquired the narrow strip of land between her house and the main road. When she got back, there were concrete barriers, steel gates, and a big red sign, "Private property, nitrogen monoxide access." The scream she let out that morning could be heard across the lake. And that's when things escalated fast. She called the cops again, claiming I was holding her hostage in her own home. Officers arrived, checked the deeds, and left shaking their heads. "Ma'am," one of them said, "you really should have read your land agreement more carefully." She tried to play victim on social media, but the comments were brutal this time. People started asking why she tried to steal my lake in the first place. That's when her biker nephew came to handle things. He showed up on his Harley, revving his engine in front of my ranch gates. I wasn't home, but my 73-year-old neighbor, a decorated Vietnam vet named Harold, was feeding my horses. When Harold came out to tell him to leave, the biker slapped him. Big mistake. Harold may be old, but he's respected by ranchers, lawmen, and yes, by the Black Cobra Commando. Because Harold saved the unit commander's life back in Nam. The call went out, and within 15 minutes, that SUV showed up, kicking up gravel like a desert storm. The biker went pale and tried to flee, but they boxed him in, dragged him off the bike, and pinned him to the dirt. The crowd watched in silence. Karen, she came running, screaming about military abuse, but the commando didn't even acknowledge her. They walked over to Harold, helped him up, and saluted. Every phone camera in the area was already live streaming. Overnight, the video exploded, 3 million views. Comments like, "This is how you handle entitled HOA Karens," and "Veteran, protected by the real ones, respect." That day changed everything. Karen went into hiding, but I wasn't done. I knew what these people would ask. What if it happened to me? So here's what you need to know if you ever face an HOA tyrant. 1. Know your land deeds. Before you fight, know what you legally own and don't assume they're right just because they speak with confidence. 2. Use the law smarter, not louder. I didn't shout, I bought. With cold hard cash and legal signatures. 3. Never let them intimidate you. Bullies crumble when the spotlight shines on them. Expose them with truth. As I sat by my lake that evening, whiskey in hand, I thought it was over, but then a new email hit my inbox. The HOA had filed a county-level petition to seize the lake as protected watershed, and one of the signers, Karen Wexler. Again. Only this time she had a new weapon, a layer from DC and a fake environmental study accusing me of polluting the lake. They were going to try to take it all again. And this time, they weren't playing fair. Chapter 2 begins where justice meets corruption, and I had to decide. Play by the rules. Or burn their entire system down. They were going to try to take it all again, and this time they weren't playing fair. The petition they filed to the county was dressed up like a noble cause. Preserve Hidden Pines Natural Resources. That was the title on the website they created overnight. It featured aerial drone shots of my lake, my dock, even a picture of my horses grazing by the shoreline. There was soft piano music playing underneath and a big fat donate button right in the middle. I nearly smashed my screen when I saw it. Karen had brought in some snake of a DC lawyer named Stuart Blevins. The man wore $1,000 suits and smelled like courtroom manipulation. I knew his type smooth talkers who made their money twisting the truth into knots. He stood in front of the county board and said, with a straight face, "This private lake is at risk of pollution and needs to be brought under HOA oversight to ensure environmental safety for all residents." Then he pulled out a scientific report claiming that the lake tested positive for dangerous runoff, completely ignoring the fact that the only water that flows into the lake comes from the mountains, not the HOA neighborhood. I could feel the rage burning under my skin. These weren't just lies. They were weaponized lies, and the worst part? Some of the county board members were actually nodding along. That's when I decided no more playing defense. It was time to go on the offensive. I called in favors. One to a retired state judge I'd helped when his barn burned down years ago. One to a local news anchor who owed me a scoop. And one to a tech-savvy kid who once worked at the HOA and knew exactly how to find the files they didn't want seen. We formed a war council. Our goal wasn't just to beat Karen and her suit-wearing mercenary. It was to expose the corruption festering inside Hidden Pines. And more importantly, reveal the truth to the town and the internet. Because if there's one thing I'd learned since this war began, it's that the truth doesn't just need to be told, it needs to be broadcast. We found the first crack in their armor almost by accident. My tech guy, Darren, hacked into the HOS internal server, not illegally, mind you, just smartly. He accessed public domain files that had been mislabeled as private. Inside, he found emails between Karen and the HOA treasurer. They discussed adjusting community maps to include my land, boundaries in HOA materials even though they knew the land wasn't theirs. They referred to my ranch as unmanaged wilderness and said the lake would raise HOA property values once it was seized. Bingo, we printed it all out. Sent copies to every county board member, every journalist, and every real estate agent in town, but we didn't stop there. I scheduled a town hall. Not just a regular meeting, a public reckoning. When the day came, the rec center parking lot was packed. Cameras from 3 news stations. Locals with folding chairs and popcorn. Ranchers from miles out came just to see the fire burn. Karen arrived late, wearing oversized sunglasses like a disgraced celebrity. Blevins strutted in behind her, carrying a leather briefcase full of deceit. I walked up to the mic, held up a manila folder and said, "Inside this folder is proof that the HOA knowingly falsified documents, misled the public, and attempted to defraud me in this county." The silence was so thick you could hear the fluorescent lights humming. "I didn't want this war," I continued, "but I'm not the type to back down when someone comes for my land, my family's legacy, and my neighbor's dignity. You slapped a veteran, filed fake reports, and tried to take what was never yours." Then I opened the folder. Cameras. Zoomed in, I read aloud the emails. People gasped. One woman actually shouted, "Karen, is this true?" Karen didn't answer. She stood frozen, lips tight, eyes darting for an exit. But it was too late. The board had heard enough. "We'll be suspending the petition indefinitely," the chairman said. The crowd erupted into cheers, but I wasn't finished. "You all need to know what would have happened if this petition passed," I said. "My property would have been open to the public. The lake would be polluted within weeks, wildlife disturbed, taxes raised. And worst of all, your rights as landowners would have meant nothing." People began nodding. They understood now. This wasn't just about a lake. It was about the creeping erosion of property rights under the cover of environmental concern. Blevins tried to speak, but the chairman cut him off. "You may leave," he said flatly. "We don't appreciate being lied to." Karen turned to flee, but Darren had one more trick up his sleeve. As she passed, he stood and played a recording. From his phone, Karen's own voice from a phone call she'd made months earlier. "That lake's worth millions. If we play it right, we'll own it by summer." The whole room gasped again. That recording sealed her fate. The next day, Karen was removed from the HOA board. Blevins was reported to the Bar Association for filing false documents. And the HOA was slapped with a $250,000 fine for attempted fraud. You'd think that'd be the end, right? But snakes don't die easy. The very next week, an out-of-state development firm called Pinehurst Property Group put in an offer to buy out the entire HOA. It smelled fishy, real fishy. Darren ran a background check. The company was a shell funded by the same investment firm that backed Blevins' law office. We were dealing with something bigger now. Karen had tapped into a network of predators, people who made a living finding small-town HOAs and flipping them into luxury lakeside resorts. And they wanted my land to be the crown jewel. I looked at the papers again. This wasn't over. This was war on a bigger scale. So I did what any rancher does when the wolves circle the flock. I dug in, I reinforced my borders. I rewired my cameras. I called every neighbor I trusted and told them they're coming for us. And most importantly, I found her land. See, while I blocked Karen's access before, I hadn't touched her second property, an empty lot she used for parties just inside the HOA line. It was up for renewal and the lease had expired. And guess who had first rights to buy it? Me, the very man she tried to destroy. Within days, the papers were signed. The fences were built, and that empty lot? I turned it into a public trash dump, legally permitted, fully licensed. Her friends who used to visit her backyard now had to walk past piles of garbage bags and buzzing flies. Petty? Maybe, but after what she pulled, it felt surgical. She went ballistic, filed a complaint with the city. They inspected the site and found it met every code. She tried to move, couldn't sell. Her Zillow listing sat dead for months. And all across the town, people learned what I had learned. When someone tries to use the law to rob you blind, sometimes the only thing more powerful than revenge is receipts. But then came the final blow. A new face appeared at my gate, an old man in a suit, holding a badge from the Federal Land Commission. "Mr. Rains," he said calmly, "I'm here on behalf of the Department of the Interior. We received notice that a national waterway may have been illegally sold or at least misrepresented." My heart dropped. This wasn't local. This wasn't HOA drama. This was federal. and Karen's fake environmental report had made it all the way to Washington. Chapter 3 begins where land meets law at the national level, and I had to decide whether to fight or vanish everything and go dark. The man at my gate didn't flinch. Mid-60s, gray suit, government badge with the seal of the Department of the Interior. Mr. Raines, we're investigating a potential misclassification of protected water under Federal Statute 218 regarding national waterway preservation. We need access to your lake. My mouth was dry. He wasn't a sheriff. He wasn't part of the HOA. This was federal land. They don't come unless someone somewhere pulled heavy strings. Karen had reached beyond this town, beyond the county. She was trying to bring the weight of the U.S. government down on me all because I had stopped her power grab. But the man made a mistake. He underestimated two things. First, that I knew my land better than anyone. And second, that I'd been preparing for this very moment since Karen first filed that fake petition. I opened the gate slowly, not because I was scared, but because I wanted him to see every camera, every posted sign, every barbed wire line, every locked document box waiting on the porch. You want to see the lake? I asked. Fine, but you better have a warrant. He looked surprised. Sir, this is a cooperative request. Not on private land, it ain't. I cut him off. Unless you're seizing it, you need probable cause. Not a request? You're not stepping foot on my land without paper. He paused. That silence told me everything. He didn't have one. This wasn't official. This was intimidation wrapped in a suit. And I wasn't playing that game. He left. But his words echoed in my head. If you don't cooperate, the department may escalate this. I knew what that meant. They'd send more, maybe armed, maybe bureaucrats, but they were coming. So I started the next phase of the plan I never wanted to use but always kept locked in the drawer, the black folder. Inside it was every legal record my father had ever kept, land surveys from the 1960s, pre-HOA water rights documents, mineral leases signed and notarized. But most importantly, a deed transfer from 1971 that clearly stated, the lake and all tributaries feeding it shall remain privately held by the Raines estate unless sold to a sovereign state by free will. That clause was gold. It meant the only way the government could take the lake was if I agreed to sell it, and I had no intention of doing so. But the pressure came fast. 2 days after the Fed left, I got a notice taped to my fence. You are hereby ordered to appear for a federal hearing on July 12th regarding misclassification of water resources. That was 3 days from now. I didn't sleep that night. I walked the lake shore at 3 a.m., remembering how my dad used to skip stones with me from the dock. I thought about how hard he worked for this, how little he trusted suits, how often he said, if someone with shiny shoes comes sniffing around the land, tell him to go kick rocks. And that's when it hit me. Karen hadn't just called in federal favors to harass me. She wanted the hearing to happen because at the hearing she could present her bought and paid for environmental report and say, see? It's dangerous. Take it. I needed to flip the board on her again. I couldn't stop the hearing, but I could change the rules. I made 3 phone calls. First, to my cousin in Montana and their who'd gone after oil companies and won. Second, to a retired water engineer who used to work for the Bureau of Reclamation and owed me a favor from a wildfire rescue in 2012. And third, to Harold the veteran Karen's nephew slapped. I asked him to come with me, uniform and all, because this wasn't just legal now, it was moral. Day of the hearing, the federal building in town was tense. Security guards scanned IDs. Karen arrived in a bright white suit, smug as ever, flanked by Blevins and a junior assistant. She didn't even look at me. She thought it was over. The panel sat straight-faced behind microphones. We are here to determine whether the Raines Lake qualifies as a federally protected waterway, one said. Karen's lawyer stood and began his song and dance. This lake, while privately owned, has been misused and signs of ecological damage are visible. We recommend immediate review of ownership and access rights. He handed out copies of the report. I didn't flinch. When it was my turn, I stood slowly, laid out my father's deed copy. Before this town existed, before the HOA existed, before anyone named Wexler moved into a gated home, this lake was here. It was my father's, now it's mine. And unless you plan to rewrite history, I suggest you read this clause aloud real slow. The panel read it. Murmurs spread. Then my cousin presented evidence. The lake's tributaries are natural runoff, not connected to any larger navigable river, and therefore not subject to federal reclassification. The engineer backed it up with historical maps. But it was Harold who sealed the day. He stood up, medals on his chest, eyes blazing. I bled for this land, he said. This man has protected it, not polluted it. And you let a suburban tyrant manipulate federal law to settle a personal vendetta? Shame on you. The room went quiet, the panel recessed. 30 minutes later, they returned. Based on submitted evidence, we find no grounds for federal oversight or removal of ownership. Case dismissed. Corinne's jaw hit the floor. Blevins looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. I turned and walked out without a word. But I wasn't done. That night, I filed 2 lawsuits, one for harassment and attempted land fraud against Corinne personally, and one for conspiracy to mislead a federal agency against Blevins. Within weeks, her house was up for auction. HOA meetings stopped being held. Hidden Pines fell silent, and the lake. The lake was more peaceful than ever. I built a new dock. Put up a plaque, in memory of justice earned, not given. But even then, I wasn't satisfied. Because I knew what viewers like you are thinking. What would I do if someone tried this to me? If they took my peace, my land, my legacy? Here's what you need to do if you're ever targeted like this. 1. Paper is power. Every deed, every signature, every map, have it copied, backed up, and notarized. It wins more battles than fists ever will. 2. Know the law more than they do. Corinne thought a loud lawyer was enough. She never expected I'd know more about federal land rights than the people enforcing them. 3. Never fight alone. Call your allies, rally your people. The truth alone won't save you, but people carrying the truth will. I thought it was over. Then I really did. But 6 months later, I received a letter in a crisp white envelope, no return address, no markings. Inside was one sentence: you beat our scouts. But the board remembers. A new threat. One bigger than Corinne. Chapter 4 begins where family feuds end and corporate empires begin. This wasn't about one lake anymore. This was about what happens when billion-dollar developers come knocking. And how far I was willing to go to protect everything my blood ever built. They tried to be clever. No logos, no signatures. Just that chilling sentence, you beat our scouts, but the board remembers. Most people would have shrugged it off as some HOA bluff, but I knew better. That wasn't Corinne, that wasn't Blevins. That was deeper, dirtier. See, when you push back on local bullies, they retreat. But when you embarrass people with real power, especially people who hide behind shell companies and false charities, you wake up something far worse. And I had just kicked that nest wide open. I had 3 days of silence after that letter. 3 days where no dogs barked, no birds chirped near the lake. My power went out twice. Drones hovered above my land longer than usual. My mailbox smashed. Once, then again, that's not random, that's a message. So I dug deep. My lawyer cousin in Montana ran the return address through his databases, found nothing. But Darren, our hacker and former HOA insider, had a better trick. He reverse searched. The printer font. You'd think that's ridiculous. But there are forensic databases that track specific printer fingerprints. Took him 24 hours, and what he found chilled me to the bone. That letter came from a downtown tower in Dallas. The same building that housed Elandra Group, a real estate conglomerate that restructures failing communities into sustainable luxury spaces. Sounded fancy. But what it meant was they bought land cheap, turned it into condos and golf courses, and tossed out anyone who didn't play ball. And guess what? Elandra owned Pinehurst Property Group, the same shell firm that tried to buy our HOA during Corinne's collapse. Now it all made sense. Corinne wasn't the real villain. She was the pawn. A disposable foot soldier for $1 billion land grab machine. And the board? That was their term for their executive circle. They didn't send thugs, they sent pressure, lawsuits, zoning reviews, anonymous letters. They didn't want my lake. They wanted my land to be forgotten quietly. Rezoned and bought up when I finally got tired and broke. But I wasn't tired, I was awake. And I wasn't broke, I was furious, so I did something that I knew would get their attention. I went loud. I bought a billboard half a mile from Hidden Pines, all black background, white letters. Drone shot. Of the lake. Then the words, "This is private land, owned, protected, untouchable." Underneath, "If you want to take it, come with truth, or don't come at all." It went viral. Local TV picked it up, then a podcast, then Reddit. Suddenly, hashtag Lake War was trending. People online were posting stories about shady HOAs. Lawyers chimed in, and Alandra, their phone lines started burning. But you think they backed off? No, they hit harder. They sent me 23 letters in 1 week. Environmental violations. Alleged tax misfilings. A missing permit from my horse stables. They even tried to retroactively fine me for unauthorized structures built decades ago by my father. Every day I woke up to another shot across the bow, but I wasn't playing defense anymore. I hired my own private investigator, ex-FBI. He tracked down 3 former Alandra employees willing to talk. They gave us documents, meeting minutes, recordings. One said, "There's a list of rural properties with strategic water. If the owner won't sell, we hit M with pressure. Death by paper, then we buy it for pennies. My lake, top of the list." But they didn't realize the list was now mine, so I escalated. I turned the recordings into a full documentary. Drowning the Small Man, How Corporations Steal the American Landscape. We released it on YouTube. Within 24 hours, it had 1.3 million views. The next day, the state attorney general called me personally. "Mr. Rains," he said, "I've seen the tape. I'm opening an investigation. And if half of what you found is real, they're done." That was when Alandra panicked. Their stock dropped 8%. Their board went dark. They offered to settle. Offered me $7.5 million for my land. Said they'd build around the lake. Let me live out my days in peace. I laughed. Out loud, and then I told them the truth. You couldn't afford my peace if you auctioned off your souls. They backed off, for now, but I knew how these people worked. They didn't accept loss, they just delayed war. So I made my final move. Not just to protect myself, but to end it. I donated the land to a private preservation trust. With one condition, no entity tied to a corporate holding development firm or foreign investor could ever legally purchase, subdivide, or lease the land. Ever. It became legally untouchable. Immune to private seizure. I kept the house, the ranch, the stables, but the lake? Now protected under a bulletproof clause of land trust law. Karen couldn't touch it. Alandra couldn't own it. And the government? Well, if they tried again, I'd already wired everything to my cousin who would trigger a public land scandal. So loud, it'd shake D.C., and now you're wondering, what would you do if they came for your land? Here's how you fight. 1. Go public. Bullies work in the dark. Cameras and headlines burn them. 2. Build a paper fortress, deeds, trusts, contracts, more powerful than bullets. 3. Expose the system. Don't just win your fight end. The pattern. 4. Don't settle. When your legacy is on the line, there is no price worth surrender. As for Karen, she moved, quietly. Word is she lives in a condo. With no backyard, no lake, and no HOA. She deleted her social media. Her name became a warning. People say, don't go full Karen. And Blevins, disbarred, tried to start a podcast. Got roasted off the internet in 2 episodes in Alandra. They're still around, but they leave Texas alone now. Because one lake cost them billions in exposure. So when people ask me now, was it worth the fight? I look out at my lake. I see deer drinking at dawn. I see the ripples where my father once cast his line. I see peace, earned peace, and I say they remembered me once, but now they remember the cost.